It hadn't even been 5 minutes since I signed the divorce papers. I was already taking my son and daughter to catch a flight to London. Meanwhile, all 7 members of my husband's family were at a high-end reproductive medicine clinic, accompanying his pregnant mistress for a scheduled ultrasound. No one expected that after reviewing the ultrasound results, the doctor would say just one sentence that would stun the whole family and send my ex-husband into a blind rage. When my pen touched the divorce decree, the wall clock in the mediator's office showed exactly 10:03 a.m., a very strange moment. No tears, no fights, no pain that I had imagined, only a ringing emptiness in my soul. My name is Catherine. I'm 32 years old. I'm a mother of 2 young children, and exactly 5 minutes ago, I officially ended my 8-year marriage to David, the man who once promised to take care of me for the rest of my life. Barely had I put my signature down when David's phone rang. A familiar ringtone played. I knew immediately who was calling. David didn't even try to hide it. He answered the call right in front of me and the mediator. His voice instantly softened. "Yes, I'm done. Wait a little bit. I'll be right there. The checkup is today, right?" I could hear every word clearly. David's voice became so sickeningly sweet that it made me nauseous. "Don't worry, my whole family will be there. Your child is the heir to our legacy after all." I exhaled quietly. In all our years of marriage, I had never heard him speak to me in that tone. The mediator pushed the document toward David. He had to check the contents before signing. David didn't even look. He scribbled his signature and threw it back with contempt. Nothing to look at, nothing to divide anyway. He pointed a finger at me. "The condo is my premarital property. The car too. The 2 kids, if she wants to take them, let her. Less hassle." His older sister Megan, standing nearby, immediately chimed in. "Exactly. He's getting married again soon anyway, and to a woman who is carrying his son," another aunt interjected. "Who would take a woman with 2 kids in tow now?" These words hung in the air, but strangely, it didn't hurt anymore. Probably because I had suffered for too long. I stood up, opened my purse, and placed a set of keys on the desk. "These are the keys to the house." David was slightly surprised. We had moved out with the kids just yesterday. He smirked. "Commendable. You're catching on." Megan added fuel to the fire. "What isn't yours, you eventually have to return." I didn't answer. Silently, I took 2 navy blue passports out of my bag. I showed them to David. "The visas have been ready since last week." David frowned. "What visas?" "I'm taking the kids to study in London." Silence hung in the air. David froze for a few seconds, but Megan was the first to yell. "Are you crazy? Do you know how much that costs?" I looked at them. "Money is not your concern." At that moment, a black Mercedes GLS pulled up to the entrance of the building. The driver got out and opened the rear door. He bowed politely. "Miss Catherine, the car is ready." David's face changed upon seeing this. "What kind of circus are you putting on?" I bent down and picked up my daughter, Chloe. My son Aiden gripped my hand tightly. I looked at David one last time and calmly said, "Rest assured, from this moment on, the kids and I won't interfere with your new life." I turned and walked down the steps. The driver handed me a thick envelope. "I was asked to pass this to you." I opened it. Inside was a folder with documents, photographs. David and that woman, Allison, signing a real estate purchase agreement at a brokerage office. It was for the exact condo that my parents had put the down payment on when we got married. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. "All evidence of Mr. David's asset transfers has been collected." I nodded, "And the clinic will have the results soon." I closed the folder. Looking out the car window, my son quietly asked, "Mom, is Dad going to visit us?" I stroked his head, saying nothing. The car pulled away toward JFK Airport. Meanwhile, David and his entire family were rushing to the largest private reproductive health center in New York. Today, Allison had her scheduled ultrasound, and their whole family believed the child in her womb was the long-awaited heir to their lineage. None of them suspected that in about an hour, one sentence from the ultrasound tech would leave them paralyzed, and David's life would begin to crumble. The large black car merged smoothly into the morning traffic. The June sun shone brightly, reflecting off the glass, and everything left behind gradually blurred. I sat in the back seat. One hand rested on Aiden's shoulder. The other gently held Chloe's head as she leaned against me. The kids hardly spoke. Perhaps they sensed today was special. Aiden stared out the window for a long time, then quietly asked, "Mom, Are we really leaving? I nodded. Yeah, and we're not coming back. My son's question made me pause. There are things adults understand perfectly well, but don't know how to explain to children. I just stroked his hair. We're going to start a new life. You and your sister will have a new school, new friends there. Chloe looked up. Mom, do they have parks there? I laughed softly. Yes, lots of them. The kids fell silent again, lost in their thoughts about a different world. The car drove through familiar streets, stores, restaurants, markets. All this had been connected to my life for 8 years of marriage, but now it felt like a movie set for a film that had already ended. The driver checked the rearview mirror. Miss Catherine, we are heading straight to the airport. Correct. Yes, that's right. He nodded and kept driving. Just then, my phone vibrated. A text from Stephen, the attorney who was helping me. The clinic reported that David's family has arrived. I read the message and put the phone away. Everything was going according to plan. At the same time, at the Hope Private Reproductive Health Center, David's entire family was settling into the VIP waiting area. Allison sat on a plush leather sofa in an expensive maternity dress, her hand resting on her barely rounded belly. Her face glowed with smugness. David's mother, Linda, walked over and took her hand. My dear daughter-in-law, are you tired? Allison smiled softly. I'm fine, Mom. Linda patted her stomach. My grandson must be very strong. Megan immediately handed over a gift box. This is premium organic green juice. I got it through some connections. Drink it every day so you can give us a healthy, strong boy. Another aunt pulled a small silver pendant from her purse. I had this blessed at Street Patrick's. They say if you wear it, you'll definitely have a son. Allison accepted everything with a smile. She looked at David. See how much everyone loves our little one? David stood nearby, his face bursting with pride. Of course, my son is the heir to the family. Linda looked at her son. Don't worry, honey. After the birth, I'll hire the best nanny. Allison will only need to rest. Megan added, Right, and then our boy will go to that international prep school. David smirked. I already took care of that. I've reserved a spot. The people around them laughed and chatted happily. No one remembered the woman who less than an hour ago had signed divorce papers with David. At that moment, a nurse approached. Allison, it's your turn for the ultrasound. David stood up immediately. I'll go with you. The whole family followed. Linda asked, Can we all go in? The nurse shook her head. Only one companion. David walked into the room with Allison. The room was cool. The bright white light made everything extremely clear. Allison lay on the examination table. David stood next to her and held her hand. Don't worry, I'm sure it's a boy. Allison smiled weakly. I think so too. The doctor put on gloves and began moving the transducer over her stomach. An image lit up on the ultrasound screen, gradually becoming clearer. The doctor stared intently at the monitor, his eyebrows slowly furrowed. David, not noticing this immediately, asked, Doctor, is my baby developing well? The doctor didn't answer. He changed the angle of the transducer, continuing to observe. Allison started to worry. Doctor, is something wrong? The doctor remained silent. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. David said irritably, Doctor, say something. The doctor slowly took off his glasses, looked at the screen once more, and then pressed the intercom button. Connect me to the legal department and send security to ultrasound room 3. David froze. Why security? Allison panicked. Is something wrong with my baby? The doctor turned to them. His voice was very calm. We need to clarify a few points. Minutes later, 2 security guards and a man in a business suit entered the room. The doctor pointed to the screen. Look closely at this image. Everyone was silent. The doctor turned to David. Are you the father of the child? David nodded. Yes. The doctor looked at Allison. Are you certain about the dates of your pregnancy? Allison trembled slightly. I'm sure. The doctor took a deep breath and spoke clearly, enunciating every word. Based on the ultrasound image and the fetus's developmental cycle, conception occurred at least a month earlier than you indicated on your intake form. As soon as those words were spoken, the air in the room froze. David stood rooted to the spot. Allison turned pale. Through the door they hadn't closed, Linda and the others had already squeezed in. Megan immediately asked, "Doctor, what do you mean?" The doctor looked at everyone. His voice was strict. "I mean that the time of conception for this child does not match the period when, according to Miss Allison, she was with Mr. David." David turned sharply to Allison. "Explain." Allison mumbled, "Maybe the doctor made a mistake." The doctor shook his head. "We don't make mistakes." The ultrasound room plunged into dead silence. Only the quiet hum of the equipment could be heard. David looked at Allison like a stranger. "You said the child was mine." Allison burst into tears. David roared. "Then whose child is this?" The question echoed through the cold room, and at that moment, no one in that room knew that far away, the plane carrying me and my 2 children had already started its takeoff roll down the runway. A new chapter of our lives had just opened, while David's life was just entering its darkest phase. Whose child is this? Nobody answered. Allison, lying on the table, clutched the white sheet. Her face was deathly pale. Her lips trembled, but she stammered out, "David, you have to believe me. It's your child." David froze for a few seconds. His mind was a tangled mess. A month? The doctor just said the fetus was at least a month older than stated. What did that mean? It meant that when he hadn't even divorced me yet, when his romance with Allison was secret, the child in her belly already existed. It meant the child was likely not his. Megan was the first to recover. She stepped forward and asked sharply, "Doctor, explain properly. Is a month's discrepancy possible?" The doctor shook his head. "We base this on fetal measurements. The margin of error can be a few days, but absolutely not a whole month." The whole room went silent. Linda, standing in the back, changed color. At first, she wanted to step forward and question Allison, but now she just froze. A moment later, she squeezed out, "Allison, honey, say something." Allison sobbed. "I don't know. Maybe I mixed up the dates." David spun around. "Mixed up? How do you mix it up by a whole month?" Allison didn't answer. She just cried. David walked up to the table, leaned his hands on the edge, and looked into her eyes. "You told me you got pregnant after we started exclusively dating. You said it was my child. You said I had to take responsibility." Every word from David was as heavy as a hammer blow. Allison shook her head in panic. I didn't lie to you." Megan suddenly slammed her hand on the counter. "Didn't lie? Then what is the doctor saying?" Linda also stepped closer.
"Allison, tell me honestly, are you sure this is David's child?" Allison lowered her head. The air in the room became so heavy, it felt like a stone on everyone's chest. The doctor, seeing the scene, said quietly, "Generally, we advise getting a DNA test after the child is born." Those words sounded like a knife strike. David took a step back. His head was spinning. What had he been doing for the last few months? He forced me to divorce him. He transferred money to buy an apartment and a car for Allison. He promised his family an heir, all because of this pregnancy. And if this child wasn't his? David suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Megan couldn't hold back anymore. She lunged at Allison and grabbed her arm. "Tell the truth!" Allison cried out in fear. "Megan, I really don't know." "You don't know?" Megan hissed. "Who else were you sleeping with?" That question made everyone in the room freeze. Allison sobbed even louder. "No one." David looked at her, and there wasn't a drop of tenderness left in his gaze, only suspicion and anger. Linda suddenly turned to David. "Son, calm down." David smiled bitterly. "Calm down?" He looked at Allison again. "How am I supposed to calm down?" Megan interjected. "Brother, I'll tell you this. This needs to be cleared up. You can't let them pin someone else's kid on you and make you pay for it." Allison cried hysterically. "I didn't lie to you. I really didn't."
The doctor had to intervene. "It's best if the family discusses this outside. This is a medical room." David didn't say anything else. He turned and walked out of the room. The whole family trailed after him, leaving Allison alone on the exam table, crying inconsolably. In the hospital corridor, the atmosphere was stretched to the limit. Megan spoke first. "David, I'll be blunt. You have to do a DNA test." Linda nodded. "Yes, absolutely." David didn't answer. He stood leaning against the wall with a blank stare. My image suddenly popped into his head. This morning, so calm, signing the divorce papers, not crying, not complaining, just saying one phrase: "I won't interfere with your new life." At the time, David thought it was funny. He thought I was weak and submissive. But now a thought flashed through his mind. Why was she so calm? Why did she already have passports ready for the kids? Why did she leave exactly today? David suddenly felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. At that moment, his phone vibrated. It was the CFO of his company. David answered irritably. "What now?" An anxious voice came through the line. "David, we have massive problems." David frowned. "Like what?" "3 of our biggest corporate partners just sent notices terminating their contracts." David froze. Those 3 projects were valued at over $10 million. If the contracts were canceled, the penalty would be nearly $1 million. David felt his heart squeeze. Why did they cancel? I don't know either. They just said they received some internal information about the company and decided to sever ties. David gripped his phone tighter. His ears were ringing. $1 million penalty? That amount could sink his company. "I'm coming to the office right now." Saying that, David hung up. Megan asked, "What happened?" David threw back over his shoulder. "Problems at the company." But at that moment, a nurse approached them. "Mr. David, the bill for Allison's examination hasn't been paid yet." Megan immediately pulled out a credit card. "I'll pay." The cashier swiped the card. "Transaction error." Megan frowned. "Try again." The cashier swiped again. "Same error. Your card seems to be blocked." Megan was shocked. "That's impossible." She handed over another card. Same result. David sensed something was wrong. He pulled out his own card. "Take mine." The cashier swiped the card and a red message flashed on the screen. "Account frozen." David was stunned. That can't be. Immediately, his phone rang again, this time from the bank. "Mr. David, in connection with an emergency injunction filed in court, all accounts in your name have been temporarily frozen."
David felt the ground drop out from under his feet. Whose injunction? The person on the other end answered, "Catherine's." That name sounded like a hammer blow to the head. David stood motionless in the middle of the clinic corridor. Only now did he begin to realize that the woman he had despised for 8 years had actually been preparing for this day for a very long time, and this was just the beginning. The hospital corridor suddenly felt unbearably stuffy. The bank employee's words echoed in his head. Applicant Catherine. The name pierced straight into his heart. Megan, seeing her brother turn pale immediately, asked David what happened. David didn't answer. He was silent for a few seconds, then turned sharply and looked toward the ultrasound room where Allison sat. His gaze was icy. Megan wouldn't let up. "David, say something." David said hoarsely, "My accounts are frozen." "What?" Megan cried out. "How were they frozen?" Linda was terrified too. "Son, explain properly." David took a deep breath. "The bank said it's by court order. Kate filed the petition." The air froze. Megan was taken aback for a moment, then sneered contemptuously. What can that housewife possibly do? But barely had she finished speaking when David's phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number. David answered. "David?" A calm male voice sounded on the other end. "My name is Stephen. I am an attorney. I represent Catherine." David gripped the phone. "An attorney? Exactly. The lawyer's voice was even. I am calling to notify you that my client's lawsuit has been accepted by the court. Pending litigation, the court granted a motion to freeze your assets. David growled into the phone. What is she accusing me of? Concealment and dissipation of marital assets during the marriage. David laughed bitterly. The condo and the car are my premarital property. The lawyer answered unperturbed. We have exhaustive evidence that you transferred over $200,000 from a joint account to your personal one to buy a condo for Miss Allison. David froze. Megan, standing nearby and hearing snatches of the conversation, snatched the phone from him. Hello? What kind of nonsense are you spouting? The lawyer didn't lose his composure. We have bank statements, the purchase agreement, and security footage from the real estate brokerage. Megan turned pale. David snatched the phone back. Are you threatening me? No, the lawyer said clearly. We are simply exercising our client's legal rights. The court will send you a summons within 3 days. We hope for your cooperation. With that, he hung up. David stood as if struck by lightning. Megan asked nervously what he said. David looked at his sister with a heavy gaze. He said, "They have proof." Megan lost her voice. Linda started trembling. Son, tell me honestly, did you really transfer money to this Allison? David didn't answer, but his silence said it all. Megan cursed. My God, you actually did it? David said irritably. Big deal, it's just a couple $100,000. Megan's eyes bugged out. A couple $100,000? Linda panicked. That's your company's operating capital. Yes, David nodded. But before he could finish, a nurse came out of the room. Allison's family can go in. Allison followed her out. Her eyes were red from crying. Seeing David, she rushed to him. David! David took a step back. Allison froze, noticing that his gaze had changed. There was no more tenderness, only coldness and suspicion. She asked in a trembling voice, David, you believe me, right? David smiled bitterly. Believe you? He looked at her stomach. You say it's my child, but the doctor says the dates don't match. Allison burst into tears. Maybe they made a mistake, Megan interjected. How can you make a mistake by a whole month? Allison couldn't find an answer. Linda had also lost her composure by this point. Allison, tell me honestly, is the baby definitely David's? Allison lowered her head. Tears dripped onto the floor, but she remained silent. David, watching this scene, felt something indescribable. It wasn't just anger, but fear. If this child wasn't his, if Kate really had all the evidence, if the court recovered all the transferred money, David suddenly felt everything around him collapsing. At that moment, his phone rang again. It was the CFO. David answered. David, it's bad. What else? The 3 major partners sent official letters canceling the contracts. David felt his head splitting. What's the penalty? Almost $1 million. Megan, hearing this, turned pale. Linda staggered. Good Lord. David hung up. He stood for a few seconds, then turned sharply to Allison. His eyes were bloodshot. This is all because of you. Allison shrank back in fear. I didn't do anything, David hissed. Didn't do anything? You dragged your pregnant belly here, who knows from whom, forced me to divorce my wife, transfer money for a condo, and now you say you didn't do anything? Allison sobbed uncontrollably. I really didn't lie to you. David laughed coldly. Didn't lie? He turned to his sister. You're right. We need to do a DNA test. Allison trembled. No, David roared. Yes. Dead silence fell over the hospital corridor. No one said anything. Only Allison's quiet sobs could be heard. And somewhere far away in the sky, the plane carrying me and my 2 children was flying above the snow-white clouds. Aiden was asleep, resting his head on my shoulder. Chloe was looking out the window, counting the clouds. I gently stroked her hair. There was no more pain in my soul, only a strange sense of relief. Perhaps when a person endures for too long, only by letting go do they truly understand how precious the word freedom is.
personal comment. In life, there are people who think betrayal is just a game. They believe in their cunning that others will tolerate it forever. But they forget one simple thing. When a woman decides to leave in silence, it usually means she has been preparing for it for a very long time. And when the truth begins to surface, it's not the one who was hurt who pays, but the one who inflicted the wound. The hospital corridor emptied out. There were no more loud conversations, not because everyone had calmed down, but because everyone was crushed by their own anxiety. David stood leaning against the wall, as if all the air had been let out of him. Now, not only doubts about paternity spun in his head, but a series of numbers that made his heart clench. A $1 million penalty, $200,000 transferred to buy Allison a condo, frozen accounts, and a lawsuit. It all added up to one massive wave ready to crash over him, and he was standing right in its epicenter. Megan was still seething with anger. She turned to Allison with a venomous tone. "Well, speak up. Whose child is this?" Allison, shaking her head, whispered through her tears, "I don't know." "You don't know?" Megan laughed coldly. "You're pregnant and you say, 'I don't know'?" Allison choked on her tears. I'm really not sure." Those words sounded like a slap in the face to David. He looked at Allison with utter disappointment. "And you're telling me this?" Allison trembled. I was only seeing you." And she fell silent. David clenched his fists. "And who else?" Allison lowered her head. She was silent, but this silence was more eloquent than any words. Linda staggered and took 2 steps back. "Lord, who did you bring into our home, son?" Megan boiled over even more. "Just some trash." Allison sobbed. "I didn't mean to." David smiled bitterly. "Didn't mean to? You got pregnant by someone else, said the kid was mine, made me divorce, transfer money. You ruined everything." Allison trembled. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." David suddenly hissed. "And what were you thinking? That I'm an idiot?" The tension was so high that even people walking by turned around. At that moment, David's phone rang again, this time from the real estate brokerage.
He answered. "David, I'm calling to inform you that a buyer has been found for the luxury condo you listed for sale." David froze. "What?" the person continued. "The buyer has already put down a $5,000 deposit. They want to close the deal in 3 days. David yelled in rage. "I didn't list any condo for sale." "But we have a power of attorney to sell with your signature." "Impossible." "We also have a video recording of the signing." David was paralyzed. He suddenly remembered how 2 months ago Allison insistently dragged him to look at apartments. Then he signed a bunch of papers without reading them. He turned sharply to her. "Did you know about this?" Allison shook her head in fright. "No, I didn't know." Megan hissed. "Of course it was you." Allison sobbed even louder. "I really don't know." David's head was spinning. He opened his mobile banking app to check his accounts again. The screen still read, "Account frozen." Immediately, another call came in. This time, an employee from his company. "David, are you at the office?" "No, I'm coming right now." David frowned. "What happened?" "The IRS just showed up." David froze. "The IRS?" "Yes. They say they received an anonymous report about tax evasion." Megan, hearing this, turned pale. "Oh my God." David felt his legs give way. One face suddenly appeared in his mind. A calm face. Kate's face this morning, signing the divorce papers. She hadn't said a word of reproach, hadn't shed a tear. She just silently put the keys on the table and quietly said, "I won't interfere with your new life." David had thought she was weak, but now he began to understand. She wasn't weak. She was simply leaving the battlefield before the real battle began. David felt a chill run down his spine. Linda was in a full panic. "Son, tell me honestly, is it serious with the company?" David didn't answer right away. He looked straight at the road. His voice was hoarse. "If I have to pay the one, Megan turned. 1 million? Linda gasped in the back. "Lord, how did you run your business, son?" David said irritably. "Mom, don't." Megan turned to him. "And is it true about Kate?" David nodded. "It's true." Megan bit her lip. "Well, she calculated everything in advance." David said nothing, but a strange feeling rose in his soul.
My image appeared again. This morning, signing the papers, I was frighteningly calm. No tears, no reproaches, just one phrase. Back then, he thought I had resigned myself. Now, remembering it, he understood I probably knew everything in advance. The car stopped in front of the office building. David quickly got out, but as soon as he entered the lobby, he felt something was wrong. The atmosphere in the company was different. Employees clustered in groups, whispering. Seeing David, they immediately fell silent. The CFO, Andrew, ran up to him. David. David immediately asked, "Where are the IRS agents?" Andrew pointed to the conference room. "In there." David walked briskly over. The door opened. Inside sat 3 men in business suits. One of them stood up. "David?" "Yes. We are from the IRS." The man placed a folder on the table. "We received anonymous reports that your company is evading taxes." David tried to remain calm. "Whose report?" The agent opened the folder. "Anonymous." David clenched his fists. One name immediately popped into his head. Kate. But the agent continued. "It's not just the report. We also received detailed documents about your company's financial transactions." David froze. "Financial transactions?" "Exactly." The agent unfolded several sheets. "Over the past 2 years, your company has had many expenses with unclear purposes." He clearly read out the numbers. Over $15,000 transferred to a personal account, $8,000 spent on personal purchases, $2,000 on jewelry, $5,000 as a deposit for a condo. Megan, standing in the back, listened and was in shock. Oh my God! David knew what that money was. He had spent it all on Allison. The agent looked directly at David. "How do you explain these expenses?" David tried to maintain his composure. "Those are personal expenses." The agent shook his head. "But the money was transferred from the corporate account." Silence fell in the room. David felt his throat go dry. Andrew, standing nearby, was paler than chalk. "David, this is—" David didn't answer. He stared at the folder on the table. One detail made him shudder. These documents were too detailed, so much so that only an insider could know about them. David turned to Andrew. "Who has access to these documents?" Andrew shook his head. "I don't know," the agent said. "We will temporarily seize certain company documents and computers to conduct an investigation." Megan suddenly yelled, "You can't do that." The agent replied calmly, "We are acting in accordance with the law." David raised his hand, stopping his sister. "Let them." Megan turned to him. "Are you crazy?" David didn't answer. He understood perfectly well that the more he resisted, the worse it would be. The agent started checking documents. Company employees stood outside the door and watched. Their faces were tense. David walked out of the conference room. He stood in the hallway and looked at the busy street below. This was the company he had built for almost 10 years. Every contract, every client, every project. And now it was all crumbling. Megan followed him out. "David, do you think this has something to do with Kate?" David was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "Probably." Megan blurted out in anger, "What a snake!" But David added nothing. A memory suddenly surfaced in his head. 6 months ago, I offered to help him with the bookkeeping. Then he just smirked. "You're a housewife. What do you know about business?" He had no idea that during that time, I had seen everything. Every expense, every transaction, every secret. And somewhere very far away, the plane carrying me and my 2 children had already crossed the ocean. Aiden just woke up and rubbed his eyes. "Mom, are we there yet?" I smiled. "Almost, sweetie." Chloe was still pressing her face to the window. "Mom, there are so many clouds here." I looked at my children and warmth spread through my soul. Perhaps life is always fair in its own way. When one door closes, another opens. Personal comment. There's a funny thing about life. When a person is too confident in their own cleverness, they often forget that others can also learn to be strong. Many men think their wives will endure forever, but they don't understand.
When a woman is silent for too long, it's not weakness, it's the moment she prepares to stand on her own 2 feet. And when that day comes, everything changes so fast that they don't even have time to figure out what happened. That evening, David's office resembled a disturbed beehive. The IRS agents were still in the conference room. Stacks of documents had been opened. Every folder was meticulously checked. Accounting computers were seized, and employees moved around the office less freely than before. David stood by the window, looking at the busy street below. Cars hurried about their business. Life outside went on as usual, and only his own life seemed to be rolling inexorably downhill. Andrew, the CFO, approached him and said quietly, "David, I have to tell you something." David turned around. "What else?" Andrew looked around and whispered, "I just checked the corporate email, and the 3 major partners who canceled their contracts didn't do it for financial reasons." David frowned. "Then why?" Andrew swallowed. "They say they received an anonymous package of documents." "What documents?" "It contained proof of the company's misappropriation of funds." David was silent. Andrew continued, "And that's not all. There were also copies of all your transfers to Ms. Allison." David felt something explode in his head. "Where was it sent from?" Andrew shook his head. "Unknown. But this person definitely knows the company's internal operations very well." David clenched his fists. He knew only one person could know it all so well. Kate Megan, standing nearby and eavesdropping on the conversation, walked over and snapped irritably, "I told you she calculated everything." David said nothing. He suddenly remembered evenings a few months ago. "Then I often sat at the dinner table and asked him the most ordinary questions. How are things at the company? How's the new project? Do you need help with the paperwork?" Then David just smirked. "Take care of the house. I'll handle the company myself." He didn't suspect that while he was busy with Allison, I had enough time to figure out every number in his accounting. An agent came out of the conference room. "Mr. David?" David turned. "Yes?" "We need you to sign some documents." David walked into the room. The agent put a stack of papers on the table. "This is the receipt for the seizure of accounting records." David ran his eyes over a few lines. Every word on the paper was like a stone on his heart. "How long will this take?" "We can't say yet." David signed. His hand trembled slightly. The agents gathered the documents and left the office. When the door closed behind them, Andrew sighed. "David, if they find a violation—" David cut him off. "I know." Megan couldn't hold back anymore. "David, I'm serious. You have to do something." "Like what?" "Meet with Kate." David turned sharply. "Meet with her?" Megan nodded. "You need to talk." David laughed coldly. "She sued me." "All the more reason you should meet with her," Megan said bluntly. "I think she did this out of revenge, but if you make concessions, maybe she'll drop the lawsuit." David was silent. The thought had already crossed his mind, but one thing prevented him from accepting it: pride. For all 8 years of marriage, he considered himself the boss. He decided everything. He made the money. He thought I was just a housewife, and now he had to bow his head to this woman. David smiled bitterly. "We'll see." Megan sighed. "You're still clinging to your pride." David didn't answer. At that moment, his phone vibrated. The name Allison lit up on the screen. David stared at it for a few seconds before answering. Allison's voice trembled. "David, I'm at the hospital." "So?" Allison sniffled. "My mom just called." David frowned. "And she knows everything?" David laughed coldly. "Did you think it could be hidden?" Allison burst into tears. Can you come over?" David replied in an icy tone. "No, I'm busy." Allison panicked.
"But I'm scared." David cut her off. "What are you scared of?" Allison paused, then said quietly, "I'm scared the baby isn't yours." David smirked. "So what?" Allison sobbed. "Will you leave me?" David said slowly, "It's not an if. You get it? Saying that." He hung up. Megan looked at her brother.
That was too cruel. She lied to me first. Megan sighed. What a mess. And somewhere very far away, the plane had already landed. After a multi-hour flight, the kids and I walked out of the terminal at Heathrow. Aiden seriously rolled his small suitcase. Chloe held my hand tightly. Mom, it's so cold. I smiled. It's not like home here. We stepped outside. The sky was gray. A light breeze was blowing. A man stood by the exit, waving to us. It was Nick, an old friend of my father's who helped me set everything up here. He walked over, his voice warm. Tired from the trip, kiddo? I shook my head. No, everything is fine. Nick leaned down to the kids. This is Aiden and Chloe, right? Aiden said politely, Hello, Uncle Nick. Nick smiled kindly. Good boy. He turned to me. The house is already prepared. You don't need to worry. I looked at my children standing nearby and felt something indescribable. Probably for the first time in many years, I felt that my future was truly in my hands. Personal comment. Life is sometimes like a game of chess. Some people think they always move first and therefore underestimate the opponent, but they forget that the one who stays silent isn't always weak. Some step back not to lose, but to see the whole board better. And when they start making their move, everything can change so fast that the opponent doesn't have time to react. Evening fell over the city, but David's office was in near chaos. After the IRS temporarily left the building to draw up reports, the entire accounting department remained sealed. Employees huddled in groups and whispered. The conversations were quiet, but their anxious glances constantly darted toward the director's office. David sat at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him, but he couldn't read a word. His mind was overloaded with everything that had happened in a single day. A $1 million penalty, a tax audit, frozen accounts, and Kate's lawsuit. On top of everything, Allison's pregnancy. Megan sat opposite him, arms crossed over her chest. She stared at her brother for a long time before saying, David, I've thought it over. David looked up. What? There's only one way to solve this problem. David smiled bitterly. Which is? You have to meet with Kate. David was silent. Megan continued. I know you don't want to, but right now there's no other way out. David looked out the window. The evening sun flooded the office with light, but in his soul it was darker than ever. Megan lowered her voice. If you let this case go to court, they could recover all the money you transferred to that Allison. David grimaced. So what? Megan sighed. It's not just about the money. You could face criminal charges. David said nothing. He knew his sister was right. Some of that money had been transferred from the corporate account. If the IRS proved it, David closed his eyes for a few seconds. At that moment, his phone rang again. It was Allison. David looked at the screen with obvious annoyance. Megan said, Answer it. David pressed the button. Allison's voice on the other end was panicked. David, can you come to the hospital? David frowned. I told you I'm busy. Allison burst into tears. David, your mom was just here. David froze. My mom? Yes, she was here. David jumped up. What was she doing there? Allison sniffled. I don't know. David immediately hung up. Megan asked, What happened? Mom is at the hospital. Megan sighed. Then you have to go. David grabbed his car keys. Come with me. The Hope Reproductive Health Center was much more crowded than in the morning. When David entered the waiting area, he saw Linda standing right in front of Allison. The atmosphere between them was so tense that everyone walking by turned to look. Allison sat on a chair, eyes red from crying. Linda stood over her with an icy glare. David walked over. Mom? Linda turned around. You finally showed up? David looked at Allison. What happened? Linda smiled bitterly. Ask her. Allison lowered her head. Her hands crumpled the hem of her dress. Megan walked over and commanded in a sharp voice. Speak. Allison trembled. I didn't mean to. David lost his patience. Give it to me straight.
Allison took a deep breath. Before I met you, I was seeing someone else. David laughed coldly, and Allison sniffled. And then I met you. David continued the interrogation. So, whose child is it? Allison was silent. This silence made the blood in David's veins boil. He clenched his fists. Speak! Allison burst into tears. I'm really not sure. Megan yelled. Not sure? You slept with 2 guys and don't know whose kid it is? Allison sobbed even louder. Linda trembled with anger. Lord, what did our family do to deserve such punishment, getting mixed up with a girl like this? Allison sniffled. Forgive me. David looked at her for a long time. There was no more anger in his gaze, only icy contempt. You said the child was mine. You made me divorce my wife. You made my whole family believe you. Allison trembled. I thought... David cut her off. You thought I would raise someone else's kid? Allison couldn't utter a word. David turned to his sister. Book her for a DNA test. Allison was terrified. No need. David looked her straight in the eye. There is a need, and you will do it. Allison shook her head. David, I'm begging you. David said slowly, if the child is mine, I will take responsibility. But if not, he paused, then added, then from here on out, you're on your own. Those words were like a knife cutting off Allison's last hope. She slid down in the chair and sobbed uncontrollably. And somewhere, very far away, I was standing in our new house with the kids. Nick had just helped us bring the bags in. The house wasn't very big, but it was very cozy. Aiden looked around. Mom, is this our house? I nodded. Yes. Chloe ran to the window. Mom, look, a garden. I walked over. Outside the window was a small backyard full of flowers. Aiden turned to me. Mom, are we really going to live here? I looked at my children and a sense of peace washed over my soul. Yes, we're going to start over from here. Aiden nodded. Chloe hugged me tightly. Mom, I like it here. I smiled. Perhaps after everything that happened, we deserved a new life. Personal comment. In life, there are people who think they hold everything in their hands. They have money, power, the confidence that others depend on them. But they forget that life always has a way of balancing things out. When a person chooses betrayal, they don't just hurt someone else, they open the door to consequences they never even suspected. After the conversation at the clinic, David drove away in an even more depressed state. The sky had already darkened as he pulled out of the parking lot. Streetlights flickered on, but their light didn't make his soul any brighter. Megan, sitting next to him, sighed the whole way. David, I'm serious. What about this Allison? I think it's over. David didn't answer, continuing to stare at the road. Megan continued, if the kid isn't yours, you better break it off with her immediately. David smiled bitterly. Do you think I want to keep going? Megan paused, then asked, and what about Kate? David's hands on the wheel tensed. Just that name made his throat feel dry. Megan looked at her brother. Are you going to meet with her? David sighed. She left. Where? Abroad? Megan was surprised. She really left? David nodded. In the morning, when he saw the passports, he thought it was just a threat. Now he understood everything had been prepared in advance. Megan shook her head. So calculating. David didn't object. In his head, there was no longer the former contempt, only a strange feeling, a feeling of defeat. The car pulled up to the office, and David saw several unfamiliar vehicles at the entrance, one with the bank logo, another belonging to the authorities. David got out of the car, and a man in a suit approached him. Mr. David? Yes, I am a representative of the bank. He handed David a stack of papers. Due to your company having a large loan with an upcoming maturity date, and given the freezing of your accounts, the bank is forced to begin the asset inventory process. David clenched his fists. Inventory? Exactly. It's a mandatory procedure. Megan, standing nearby, immediately boiled over. You have no right. The man replied calmly. We are acting strictly according to the contract. David took the papers. Every line was like a knife strike. A $3 million loan, maturity date, risk of asset confiscation in case of non-payment. Megan ran her eyes over the document and paled. My God, David, why did you take out such a massive loan? David said nothing. He knew perfectly well that the money went toward expanding the business. But now, with major contracts canceled and accounts frozen, this loan had become a ticking bomb. The bank employee added, We will begin the inventory tomorrow. We hope for your cooperation. Saying that, he turned and left. Megan stood rooted to the spot. David, this is bad. David walked into his office. The lights were on, but no one was working. Several employees were huddled in a corner. Seeing David, they fell silent. Andrew, the CFO, ran up to him. David? What? Andrew said quietly. 2 more employees just submitted their resignations. David smiled bitterly. Good for them. Megan sighed. Rats fleeing a sinking ship. David walked into his office. The spacious office he was once so proud of now felt empty and cold. He sat in his chair and opened his phone. In his contacts list was Kate's name. His finger hovered over the screen. He remembered the early years of their marriage. They had just gotten married, living in a small apartment. There wasn't much money, but every dinner was warm. I often waited for him to come home from work, sometimes until 10 p.m., sometimes staying up all night while he was at business meetings, but he never complained once. David stared at the phone screen, and a feeling he never thought about rose in his soul. Remorse. Megan stood in the doorway. David, what are you thinking about? David turned off his phone. Nothing. And at that very time, somewhere very far away, I was standing in the backyard of our new house. The evening was quiet. A light breeze rustled the flowers. Aiden was helping Nick water the garden beds. Chloe was running around the yard chasing a butterfly. Aiden, catch it! Hold on! The children's laughter echoed through the small garden. Nick turned to me. How do you like it here, kiddo? I smiled. Very peaceful, Uncle Nick. He nodded. Your father told me you are very strong. I looked at the kids. I don't know if I'm strong. I just didn't want my children growing up in a family full of lies. Nick nodded. You did the right thing. I looked up at the darkening sky. There are things in life that once closed, you never want to open again. And it seems the old chapter of my life is truly over. There is a simple truth that many do not realize. Happiness cannot be built on betrayal. When a person abandons their family in pursuit of new illusions, they think they are seeking freedom, but at some point they realize they have lost not just a marriage, but the very home they once had. That night, David barely slept. He sat in his office until late. The lights in the building had already gone out. Only a yellow strip of light seeped from the director's office. Outside the window, the city glowed with lights, but David's soul was as empty as a room after moving out. His phone lay on the desk. The screen was dark. Kate's name was still in his contacts list. All it took was pressing one button, but David couldn't. His male pride wouldn't let him. Suddenly, the phone vibrated. It was Andrew, the CFO.
David, are you still at the office? Yes. Can I come up? David sighed. Come up. Minutes later, Andrew entered the office. His face was pale. What happened? Andrew put a folder on the desk. Look at this. David opened it.
It was a preliminary financial report following the cancellation of the contracts. The red numbers hurt his eyes. Megan, standing in the back, glanced over and gasped. A $1.5 million deficit? Andrew nodded. And these are preliminary calculations without taking into account the contract penalties. David leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. $1.5 million, plus a $1 million penalty, plus the bank loan. The total sum far exceeded the company's current capabilities. Megan asked quietly, "There's no way out?" Andrew shook his head. "If there's no new cash injection, the company will last a month at most." Silence fell in the room. A month sounds like a long time, but in business, it's just a blink of an eye. David stared at the report in front of him. Every page reminded him of his mistakes. The money transferred to Allison, the neglected projects, the hasty decisions. Megan sighed. "David, do you remember how it all started?" David opened his eyes. "What exactly?" "When the company was just being founded." Megan sat in a chair. "Kate helped you a lot." David was silent. Megan continued. "I remember you didn't even have an accountant back then. Kate kept all the books for you." David smiled bitterly. "Why bring up the past?" Megan looked her brother straight in the eye. "I mean to say that without Kate, this company might not even exist today." David couldn't argue. He actually knew it. In the early years, when he was just starting out, I helped him a lot. I studied accounting in college. I stayed up nights doing balance sheets. I went with him to client meetings. But after the company started turning a profit, David gradually changed. He hired new employees, accountants, managers, and I gradually faded into the background. Eventually, I was just a housewife in a big house. David looked down at the desk. A memory surfaced in his mind. The day he bought his first car. I stood at the doorstep laughing joyfully. "You did so great." Back then, David took it for granted. He didn't realize that the person who had silently supported him for years was his wife. Andrew broke the silence. "David, I think you should mentally prepare yourself." "For what?" "We might have to sell the company." David looked up. His gaze turned icy. "No." Andrew sighed. "But if we don't—" David jumped up. "I said no." Megan looked at her brother. "David, I'm serious. Maybe it's time to cut your losses." David laughed bitterly. "Cut my losses? This company is all I have." Megan said quietly, "But you're already losing everything." David didn't answer. He turned and walked out of the office. The company hallway was empty, only the cold white light of the fluorescent lamps. David stood by the window and looked out at the city. The night wind blew. He suddenly remembered the old house, the evenings when I waited for him for dinner, the laughter of little Aiden and Chloe. Before, David paid no attention to it, but now that everything was falling apart, those memories became painfully clear. And somewhere very far away, morning was breaking. Soft sunlight filtered into the small garden behind the house. Chloe sat on the steps with a picture book. Aiden was helping Nick fix the fence. I stood in the kitchen brewing tea. The aroma of hot tea filled the house. Chloe ran in. "Mom." "Yeah, I like the new school." I smiled. "You haven't even been there yet." Chloe laughed. "But yesterday, the teacher talked to me, and she was so much fun." I patted her head. "You'll have a lot of new friends." Chloe hugged me. "And I like it here." I looked at my daughter, and peace spread through my soul. Perhaps life doesn't always give us what we want, but sometimes, by losing one thing, we find something better. Personal comment. Many only realize the value of family when they lose it. When they are together, it seems that dinners, laughter, and quiet evenings are a given, but when the house empties, they realize that the most valuable thing isn't money or success, but the people who were there during the hardest times. The next morning, David arrived at the office earlier than usual. It was barely dawn, and the street outside the building was still empty. The stores on both sides were closed. Only delivery trucks drove by occasionally. David stood at the entrance for a few seconds before walking in. In the past, coming here always filled him with pride. This company was the result of almost 10 years of non-stop work. But today, that feeling was gone. As soon as he entered the lobby, David saw Andrew. His face was full of anxiety. "David?" David sighed. "What now?" Andrew handed him a phone. "Look." On the screen was a fresh article from a financial news site. The headline was short: "David and partners under investigation for financial fraud." David quickly skimmed a few lines. The article was short, but the information was highly specific. A tax audit, cancellation of major contracts, the threat of bankruptcy. David closed the phone. It felt like a heavy stone lay on his soul. Megan approached from behind. "News travels fast." Andrew nodded. "The press already knows." Megan shook her head. "Now the clients will panic even more." David said nothing. He walked into his office, but as soon as he sat down, his desk phone started ringing off the hook. Clients, partners, the bank, every call was the same. Everyone wanted to know what was going on with the company. After a few calls, David just turned off the phone. He had no more strength to explain himself. Megan leaned against the desk. "David?" "What?" "I think you need to meet with Kate." David looked up. His gaze was exhausted. "You've been talking about this since yesterday," Megan said slowly. "I know you don't want to, but you have to admit it. Right now, only Kate can help you." David smiled bitterly. "She sued me." "Yes, but if she drops the lawsuit—" David was silent. Megan continued. "I don't know where she is, but you have to find her." David leaned back in his chair. My image suddenly popped into his head again. The day I left, I didn't cry, didn't talk much, just took the kids and left. David thought then that I would come back, or at least call, but it had been 3 days, not a single message, not a single call. This silence made him feel uneasy. At that moment, the door opened and an employee walked in. "Mr. David?" "What?" "There's a visitor for you." "Who?" "An attorney." David and Megan exchanged glances. Megan said quietly, "Maybe from Kate." David stood up. "Send him in." Minutes later, a man in his 40s walked into the office. He was in a dark suit, holding a briefcase. "Hello, David." "Hello. My name is Stephen." David immediately recognized the name. It was the lawyer who represented me. He asked coldly, "Why are you here?" The lawyer placed his briefcase on the desk. "I brought additional documents." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This is a supplement to the statement of claim." David frowned. "What evidence?" The lawyer looked him straight in the eye. "Evidence that you transferred funds from the joint marital account to your personal account and then used them to purchase a condo for Miss Allison." Megan immediately interjected. "That still doesn't prove it was marital funds." The lawyer smiled. "We prepared all the bank statements." He placed several pages on the desk. David looked at the familiar numbers. He couldn't deny. The lawyer continued. "In addition, we have video footage of the moment you signed the purchase agreement." David clenched his fists. Megan asked hurriedly, "What do you want?" The lawyer calmly replied, "We are merely protecting the legal interests of our client." David laughed coldly. "Where is she?" The lawyer didn't answer right away. He simply said, "Catherine is currently living far away with the children." David continued, "I can meet with her." The lawyer looked at him for a few seconds. "That depends on her." David was silent. Megan said quickly, "Tell Kate that if she drops the lawsuit, we are open to negotiations." The lawyer nodded.
"I will pass that along," saying that he gathered the documents and stood up. Before leaving, he turned around and added, "David, I want to remind you of one thing." David looked at him. The lawyer said slowly, "Some mistakes in life cannot be fixed with money." Those words made everyone in the room fall silent. And somewhere very far away, evening was falling. I was walking in a park near our house with Aiden and Chloe. The trees here were very tall and narrow stone paths wound through the green lawns. Chloe ran ahead. "Mom!" "Yes, it's so beautiful here." Aiden walked next to me. "I like it too." I looked at my children. A light breeze rustled the leaves and the singing of birds could be clearly heard. Perhaps after everything we had been through, we had finally found our quiet place. Personal comment. Many people often delude themselves. They think that if they have success, if they make a lot of money, everything else can be replaced. But in reality, that's not true. Family, trust, and respect cannot be bought with money. Having lost them, a person realizes that these seemingly insignificant things were the most important foundation of their life. After the lawyer left, silence reigned in David's office again. As soon as the door closed, Megan immediately turned to her brother. "David, did you hear that?" David was still standing by the desk. "Hear what?" Megan said. "Kate isn't joking. This time, she's going all the way." David didn't answer. He stared at the folder left on the desk. Bank statements, the purchase agreement, transfer receipts, these were all irrefutable pieces of evidence. He couldn't deny them. Megan continued, "I'm telling you, seriously, if this goes to trial, you're going to have massive problems." David smiled bitterly. "You think I don't know that?" Megan stepped closer. "So what are you waiting for?" David looked at his sister. "What do you want me to do?" Megan answered bluntly, "Find Kate." David paused for a few seconds. It felt like two people were fighting in his soul, pride and reality. Finally, David sighed. "She's out of the country," Megan immediately said. "Then fly there." David laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple? What if she doesn't want to see me?" Megan crossed her arms. "At least you'll try." David didn't answer. At that moment, his phone vibrated. The name on the screen made him freeze. Allison. David stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "What now?" Allison's voice on the line was weak. "David, What?" Allison sniffled. "I'm in the hospital." David answered coldly. "So?" "I'm having a threatened miscarriage." Megan, standing nearby, frowned. Allison continued in a trembling voice. "The doctor said I need to stay in bed here for a few days." David was silent. There wasn't a drop of sympathy left in his soul, only exhaustion. Allison said quietly, "Can you visit me?" David answered slowly, "No." Allison burst into tears. "David, I don't have anyone but you." David laughed coldly. "You're wrong. You have the father of your child." Allison fell silent. After a few seconds, she asked in a trembling voice, "Do you really not believe me at all?" David answered shortly, "No," and he hung up. Megan looked at her brother. "That was too harsh." David sat in his chair. "Do you think I have any feelings left?" Megan said, "Nothing more." The atmosphere in the room became heavy. After a while, Andrew knocked on the door. "David?" "Yes?" "There is an issue." Andrew hesitated for a few seconds. "The bank just called." David frowned again. Andrew said quietly, "They are demanding that you provide a debt repayment plan within 3 days." David smiled bitterly. 3 days? "Yes. Otherwise—" Andrew didn't finish, but everyone knew what it meant. Asset confiscation. Megan sighed. "David, you really need to find Kate." David looked out the window. Late evening light seeped into the room. He suddenly remembered an old moment. The day Aiden was born, I held his hand in the delivery room. My forehead was covered in sweat, but I still smiled.
You're a dad. David was very touched back then. He thought his family would always be like that. But he destroyed it himself. David closed his eyes. A feeling of remorse slowly spread through his soul. And somewhere else, the evening slowly faded. I sat on a wooden bench in the backyard. Aiden and Chloe played nearby. Nick walked over. "What are you thinking about, kiddo?" I smiled. "Nothing." He looked at the kids. "They like it here." "Yeah." He nodded. "I already found a school for them." I bowed my head in gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle Nick." Nick said softly, "Don't thank me. Your father helped me a lot once." I watched my laughing children, and peace spread through my soul. Our new life had begun, and this time I wouldn't let anyone destroy it. Personal comment. There are mistakes in life that can be fixed, but there are also those that change everything forever. Betrayal is not just a momentary weakness, it is a crack in trust. And when trust is broken, no matter how hard you try, it is very difficult to glue back together. Therefore, sometimes the wisest thing is not to try to go back to the past, but to learn to accept the fact that the past is over. 3 days passed. The sky over the city was as gloomy as the previous days. David sat alone in his office. The spacious room, once so familiar, now felt cold. A stack of documents lay on the desk, next to a silent phone. 3 days. They flew by so fast that David barely had time to breathe. The IRS had seized even more documents. The bank sent an official demand for loan repayment. 3 major partners officially terminated their contracts, and the court sent a summon for Kate's lawsuit. David picked up the paper. Every line printed in bold was a cold reminder. This was no longer a family matter. It was the law. Megan stood in the doorway, stared at her brother for a long time, and then asked, "David, have you thought it over?" David put the paper on the desk. "About what? Going to see Kate?" David was silent. Over the past 3 days, he had thought a lot about the company, the debts, and his lost marriage. Finally, David sighed. "There's no need anymore." Megan was surprised. "What are you talking about?" David said slowly, "I think it's already too late." Megan walked into the office. "David, don't be stubborn." "It's not about being stubborn." David looked out the window. "You know what I'm afraid of the most?" Megan was silent. David continued, "Not losing the company, not losing the money, but realizing that I lost what was most important." Those words made Megan fall silent. David smiled bitterly. "You used to tell me Kate was a good woman. I didn't believe it." He lowered his head. "Only now do I understand." Megan sighed. "David, I still think you should talk to her at least once." David shook his head. "No need. I know she won't come back." Megan went quiet. Silence reigned in the room again. At that moment, Andrew knocked on the door. "David, what is it?" Andrew placed a stack of papers on the desk. "This is the official notice from the bank." David opened it. Reading just a few lines, he understood everything. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings on the collateralized assets. This meant that the story of David and partners had practically come to an end. David folded the paper. This time, he felt no panic, only a strange calmness. Perhaps when everything reaches the end, a person stops being afraid. And somewhere very far away, morning arrived very softly. Early sunshine shone through the leaves of the trees in the park. I sat on a wooden bench and watched my children run on the lawn. Aiden played ball with new friends. Chloe sat under a tree and laughed with a little blonde girl. The children's laughter carried through the clear morning air. Nick sat next to me. "How's life treating you here, kiddo?" I smiled. "Very peaceful, Uncle Nick." He nodded. "That's good." After a while, he asked, "Do you ever think about going back home?" I looked at the kids. Aiden was running very fast. Chloe waved to me and yelled, "Mom, I'm up." "Maybe someday," I said, "but not now." Nick smiled. "I understand." I walked over to the kids. Chloe hugged my arm.
"Mom, I like it here." I patted her head. "Me too." Aiden ran up. "Mom, I won." I laughed. "Good job." The kids took my hands, and the 3 of us walked down the narrow park path. A light breeze rustled the leaves. I looked up at the blue sky and felt a lightness in my soul. There are chapters in life that, when closing, bring a lot of pain, but sometimes they are exactly what open up a new, more peaceful life. Life always finds a way to teach us the lessons we don't want to learn. When a person has everything they think, the most important things will always be around. But in reality, that's not true. Family, trust, and love are very fragile. Having lost them due to selfishness and betrayal, there isn't always a chance to get everything back. And sometimes the best thing we can do is not to try to fix the past, but to learn to live better for the rest of our lives. Looking back at the whole story of Catherine, David, and their circle, perhaps what makes you think the most isn't who won and who lost. Life is not a simple game of chess. What torments you is the choice made in a single moment, a choice that seems insignificant but changes the fate of an entire family. For David, the biggest mistake wasn't just the betrayal. The bigger mistake was losing respect for his wife. When a man begins to neglect the one who went through the hardest years with him, that is when the foundation of the family begins to crack. Money can be earned again, a company can be rebuilt, but once trust is broken, it's very hard to glue back together. As for Catherine, many might think she was too cold, leaving so quickly, but in reality, it was strength. Some women faced with pain cry, beg, or try to hold on, but there are those who choose silence, preparing a different path for themselves, not for revenge, but to protect themselves and their children. Catherine's calmness is not a lack of feeling, but the result of years of patience. This story is also a reminder for many who are married. A family does not exist forever just because of a marriage certificate. It exists thanks to respect, gratitude, and daily responsibility. When one person starts thinking the other will never leave, that is exactly when the risk of losing them becomes even greater. If one could give advice to David, it would probably be to learn to accept the consequences of his decisions. Sometimes life doesn't give us a chance to go back and fix our mistakes, but it always gives us a chance to become wiser after them. And for those listening to this story, I hope we all learn one simple thing. Value the person next to you while it's still possible. Don't wait until the house is empty, until the laughter disappears, until the other person starts a new life to understand how important they are.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like. Your support means a lot to me. Subscribe to channel so you don't miss new stories.